and this slideshow is presented to you by Hannah, Ashley, Riley, and Molly. So the background of infectious agent life cycles would be evolved around viruses, parasites, and bacteria, as shown on the slide. Viruses, it all depends on the ecosystem that is changing and how that it could increase most insect, but mainly mosquito population. And we all know that mosquitoes spread various diseases and how that can affect everybody. Parasites rely mainly on a certain ecosystem, and because of climate change, that means that they have to move with said climate or alter their lifestyle, meaning they'll have to evolve, and that could become worse for everybody. And then finally, bacteria, which is more commonly occurring in warmer and wetter weather, which, because of said climate change, is becoming more common. So to predict the consequences of climate change on infectious diseases, it's meaning that habitats are changing. Disease seasonality is also being altered, meaning like diseases are going around at more uncommon times than they used to. And co-infections are becoming more common due to ecosystems changing, which, from everything I've already talked about, I feel like should make sense.
For this next slide, I'm going to be going over the ecophysiology of host-pathogen interactions. And while this sounds like a lot of words, this can be broken down into what is a host-pathogen relationship and what the effects of temperature increase are on these pathogens. So I'll start with first, what is a host-pathogen relationship? And this is going to be a relationship that is focused on the ways that a pathogen can live and survive in a host. So ultimately, this relationship involves a pathogen putting itself in a host, and this is primarily harmful for the host organism because when the pathogen inserts itself into the host, it can cause the host to have issues with its normal body function, and it can also damage tissue inside of the host. And then for the next point, the effects of temperature increase on these pathogens and ultimately the host. So temperature increase can change the severity of an infectious disease. So this basically means that depending on how a pathogen will survive, the temperature increase could make it a more severe infectious disease or a less severe infectious disease. So it can become a more harmful disease or a less harmful disease. And then finally, temperature increase can also result in a change in host immunity. So this means this can change how long a infectious disease can live in a host. And this increases how prevalent it is within the host.
Continuing on with ecophysiology of host pathogen interactions. Metabolic theory of ecology, or MTE, is described as how the metabolic rates of organisms influence ecological processes. Predicting host pathogens is important for health and understanding the impacts of climate change, which enables effective interventions and preparations against possible disease outbreaks.
Climate change alters the habitats and resources available, which in turn affects the interactions between species. The changes in temperature can also lead to habitat degradation, threatening biodiversity. Climate change can also put entire host communities at risk of extinction, and the repercussions could be especially large if the host is a keystone species. A keystone species is a species that others in the ecosystem largely depend on. If it were removed, the ecosystem would change drastically in the abundance and diversity of other species. It can also influence the prevalence of infectious diseases by regulating populations of other species like vectors. Climate change is affecting these keystone species, which affects their ability to control things in their ecosystem, such as the growth of vectors. An example of this is a near extinction of the abalone from a warming-driven disease, and this caused extensive community shifts across multiple trophic levels. Additionally, seagrass declines caused by infection have degraded nursery habitats for fish and migratory waterfowl and caused the extinction of the eelgrass limpet.
My slide is Community Ecology, Biodiversity, and Climate Change. I've included two definitions that are important for understanding the microbial communities. The first one is commensal microbes, and this is where microorganisms that live on the body surface or in the mucosa without causing harm to their host. The second definition is mutualistic microbes, and this is where the microorganisms have a symbiotic relationship with another organism. I have two examples of the impact of rising temperatures on microbes, and the first one is altered microbial activity, and this is where higher temperatures may disrupt beneficial microbial communities, leading to increased pathogen growth or reduced host defenses. The second point is disease vectors, and this is where climate change can expand the geographic range of disease vectors, affecting ecosystems and introducing new infectious risks to local species. Another topic that I want to discuss today is effects of biodiversity loss. I have two examples for that, and those include loss of ecosystem services and increased disease risk. For the first one, as biodiversity decreases, ecosystems lose key species that regulate microbial and pathogen populations. This makes the diseases more likely to spread. And then for increased disease risk, diverse ecosystems can naturally suppress the spread of diseases, while biodiversity loss makes ecosystems more vulnerable to disease outbreaks.
It is important to look at shifts in behavior, movement, and phenology of hosts and parasites when considering how climate change affects disease. First, it is important to understand the definition of phenology. Phenology is the study of the timing of seasonal biological events in plants and animals, which makes an important consideration to include since it is an indicator of climate change. Climate change can affect trends in species migrations, including earlier migrations, mismatched timing, and altered routes. This overall affects nature's cycle. Phenological changes in pathogenic life cycles include emerging earlier, longer activity seasons, and mismatched host-pathogen interactions. Additionally, climate change affects the developmental stages, including faster development, developmental mismatches, and changes in reproductive timing.
Okay, the consequences for conservation and human health are these. The rising temperatures, changes in precipitation, and changing ecosystems affect how the diseases spread, mainly because of the insect population moving and how the entire Earth is raising in temperature, which is causing an easier bacterial growth around our population. In the Arctic, the wildlife is also changing because of the frequently rising temperatures. Even the ocean water temperatures are changing. They're becoming warmer, and it's causing diseases to become more prevalent around that area. The warmer weather also increases the risks of more common diarrheal diseases, and in the rainfall of humans, some of those diseases are malaria and dengue. They're technically called vector-borne diseases, and it happens when bacteria is introduced more commonly to you because of the warmer weather. Being able to forecast when to plant the fields and how to harvest has helped us a lot over the centuries to be able to figure out what time of the year it is best to grow certain plants now based on how the climate is changing. And new technology is even being made to help physiological processes and gene expression to help improve global conditions around the world.
Lastly, it's important to look at the outlook and future challenges of this issue. One of this is mechanistic models and drivers, and this includes pathogen transmission rates, vector populations, a good example of this is mosquitoes, and environmental changes. There are risks of human systems, including diseases like malaria and Lyme disease. Agricultural systems are affected from altered life cycle of pests and pathogens, and even wildlife systems from altered habitats due to climate change. Climate disease interactions and their implications on other aspects of climate change destabilize ecosystems, decrease agricultural productivity, and affect migration.